Welcome to the Quincy Mine, one of the first and most successful copper mines in Michigan's copper country, here on the Keweenaw Peninsula. But the story of copper here began long before drills and steam engines. For thousands of years, Native Americans mined and shaped copper from this very region. The copper found here is some of the purest on Earth, up to 99.8% pure. Soft enough to hammer into tools, ornaments, and weapons without melting. Artifacts made from Keweenaw copper have been found as far away as the Mississippi Valley and Gulf Coast, proof that it fueled one of North America's earliest trade networks. Much of that early metal came from what is known as float copper, pieces of native copper broken free from bedrock during the Ice Age and scattered across the Keweenaw by glaciers. As the glaciers melted, they deposited copper across the landscape, leaving chunks resting right on the surface, easy to find, collect, and shape. It's what first drew both ancient peoples and centuries later, industrial explorers to this land. Imagine discovering metal so pure, you could shape it by hand. No smelter, no forge. That discovery right here changed human history, long before the first steam engines ever fired. By the early 1840s, word of this remarkable copper began reaching the East Coast. Prospectors, geologists, and investors soon realized the Keweenaw held vast veins of pure metal, the kind the industrial world desperately needed. But this boom came with a cost. In 1844, the Treaty of La Pointe was signed between the United States and the Ojibwa Nation, ceding large tracts of land in the western Upper Peninsula. That treaty gave the U.S. government access to the region's immense resources, especially copper and timber, paving the way for exploration and companies like Quincy. Just 2 years later, in 1846, two separate mining groups purchased adjoining claims here on Quincy Hill. Rather than compete, they merged, forming the Quincy Mining Company, named after Quincy, Massachusetts, where financiers provided major early investment. So when investors chose the name Quincy, they linked this new mining venture in Michigan to a legacy of New England vision and national progress. Quincy became one of the first great operations in what soon was called Copper Country, the stretch of Michigan's Upper Peninsula that once produced most of America's copper. Unlike most copper in the world, which occurs in sulfide ore that requires chemical extraction, Keweenaw copper was already metallic. It only needed smelting and refining to remove impurities before being cast into ingots and shipped out across the Great Lakes. The real turning point came with the discovery of the Pewabic Lode, a rich underground vein of native copper encased in ancient basalt. Mining this lode transformed Quincy from a risky claim into one of the most productive mines on Earth. By the 1850s, copper from these very hills was traveling far beyond Michigan. It was used to strike U.S. pennies, stretch telegraph lines that connected the East and West Coast, and forge warship hulls and cannon bronze for the U.S. Navy. It powered generators, wired cities, and strengthened the infrastructure that built modern America. The penny itself has quite a story. It was first introduced in 1793, featuring the flowing hair wreath design. Starting in 1857, the penny changed to the Flying Eagle cent, and then to the Indian head cent in 1859, both made with copper from right here in Michigan. It wasn't until 1909 that Abraham Lincoln appeared on the coin for the first time. So next time you hold a penny, ask yourself, have you ever wondered who was on the penny before Lincoln? Chances are the copper in your hand once came from these very hills. From ancient tools to American coins, Keweenaw copper connected generations, carrying our nation's story in every spark and every cent. Between 1846 and 1945, the Quincy Mine produced over 700 million pounds of copper, enough to help electrify cities, build warships, and connect a growing nation through miles of telegraph lines. But what really set Quincy apart wasn't just the scale of its production, it was its consistency. In an era when mining companies came and went, fortunes rose and collapsed overnight, Quincy earned the nickname Old Reliable. From 1868 through 1920, Quincy Mining Company paid uninterrupted annual dividends, more than 50 consecutive years of profit sharing. That kind of financial reliability was nearly unheard of in the volatile mining industry of the 19th and 20th century. It meant stability for investors, but it also meant livelihoods for thousands of workers and their family. At its height, the company employed over 2,000 people, making it one of the largest private employers in the Upper Peninsula. Entire communities, schools, churches, general stores, and even recreation halls grew around the mine. In fact, the company helped build housing for miners and their families on Quincy Hill, establishing a self-contained company town overlooking Portage Lake. These neighborhoods were more than housing. They were homes to immigrants from Finland, Cornwall, Ireland, and Germany who brought their traditions, skills, and cultures with them. Life was tough, but steady pay and company support made Quincy a beacon of opportunity in the rugged north. Quincy's success also came from constant innovation. Engineers here pioneered new hoisting technologies, advanced dewatering systems, and steam-powered pumps that allowed them to mine deeper than ever before. The crown jewel of that progress was the 1918 Nordberg steam hoist, the largest steam hoist ever built when it was completed. It could raise 10 tons of ore in a single lift from more than a mile underground. That kind of power symbolized America's industrial might, born right here in the Keweenaw. Each massive rotation of these wheels represented hundreds of tons of copper ore, copper that would go on to wire homes, build bridges, and spark the age of electricity. Old Reliable wasn't just a nickname, it was a badge of pride, proof that the mine, its workers, and its engineers could overcome exhaustion, danger, and the odds stacked against them. While other mines faltered, Quincy endured. And even after its closure in 1945, the legacy of that reliability still stands in the machinery that refuses to rust away. Every brick, every beam, every turning wheel tells the same story, that of a mine, a company, and a community that defined what reliability truly meant. So now that we've covered the big picture, the people, the geology, and the incredible reach of this copper, let's step into history itself. We're heading out on a 15-stop self-guided tour, following the same path miners once walked every day. Each stop reveals how Quincy became one of America's earliest industrial success stories. Stick around, because every step uncovers another layer of a copper empire that helped build the modern world. All right, stop one. Number one, just the beginning, is the gift shop here at Quincy. So let's head in and check out stop number one, the gift shop. And as you can see, they're open. Our first stop is the Quincy Mine gift shop, but back in 1893, this was the supply office, the starting point of every miner's day, built from the region's signature Jacobsville sandstone. Its red and white stripes come straight from the layers of the Keweenaw itself, a fitting gateway to the mine that helped shape American industry. Today, the building serves as the mine's visitor center and gift shop, a role it took on after its 1990 restoration. But more than a century ago, this was where the hum of conversation and the clatter of tools marked the beginning of a shift underground. As we're starting our journey here, so did the miners of Quincy. Each morning they checked in at this very building to collect their daily supplies and tools, and most importantly, candles to light their way into the dark abyss below. In the late 1800s, these were tallow candles made from animal fat rather than wax that averaged about 9 inches long and 3/4 of an inch thick, burning for only a few hours, even less in the damp, smoky air of the mine. To make it through a full shift, each miner carried a handful of candles, wedged into a cap holder or pressed into the rock wall, their flames barely piercing the darkness. Every miner was responsible for his own equipment and his own safety. The company didn't issue supplies for free. Each item was purchased from the company's store with the cost deducted from the workers' pay. It was a common system across mining towns, and it meant that every swing of a hammer came with a literal price tag. The miners here worked long, punishing hours. While records differ, accounts from the 1913 Copper County strike, when miners fought for an 8-hour day, shows that before then, their shifts were certainly 10 to 12 hours and sometimes longer. Imagine descending before sunrise, laboring all day in heat, dust, and darkness, then returning after nightfall to see the first hint of daylight again. Their work was brutally demanding, swinging hammers, drilling into rock, and loading tons of ore by hand in suffocating cramped tunnels. The sound echoed endlessly, the clang of steel, the hiss of steam, and the distant rumble of hoist cables drawing copper to the surface. Deeper underground, temperatures climbed, ventilation was poor, and the air was thick with dust, sweat, and the smell of burning tallow. Communication relied on bell codes sent up the hoist line, 1 ring to stop, 2 to raise, and 3 to lower, signals that could mean life or death. At the end of each exhausting day, miners returned here to turn in their tools and report their output before walking home to their small company houses scattered along Quincy Hill for a meal, a few hours of rest, and another dawn waiting. This building wasn't just an office, it was the line between the world above and the one below, where daylight ended and duty began. Walking around the gift shop, and I don't know if you caught the theme yet. Rocks, rocks, and more rocks. So we're gonna continue checking out this. We're getting ready to leave stop number 1. Let's head to stop number 2. Our second stop is the Quincy Oil House, a small structure that carried enormous responsibility. Built of thick, fireproof stone, this building was designed to safely store some of the mine's most volatile but essential resources, oils and lubricants. Inside were barrels of kerosene, machine oil, axle grease, and lamp fuel. These oils were the lifeblood of Quincy Mine. Without them, the hoist drums would seize, drills would grind to a halt, and even the miners themselves would be left in the dark. Because these materials were so dangerous, the oil house was intentionally built away from the hoist house, boiler rooms, and shops. Engineers knew the risk. A single spark, a tipped lantern, or a dropped match could have turned this hill into an inferno. This stone bunker stood as the mine's shield against fire. Each morning after collecting tools in the supply office, miners stopped here not just for oil, but also for carbide, the fuel for their lamps. By the early 1900s, carbide lamps had begun replacing candles and kerosene lamps. Underground, when water dripped onto the carbide, it produced a acetylene gas, burning with a bright, steady flame that cut through the dark, far better than tallow or kerosene ever could. Carbide was safer and longer lasting than candles, but miners still had to carry enough for a long shift, and the oil house was where their day's supply began. This little building may not look like much, but it was central to every shift. It provided the light, the fuel, and the lubricants that kept Quincy alive. And from here, the story shifts from what fueled the mine to what lifted it. The hoist houses were the muscles that carried ore, equipment, and men between the darkness of the shaft and the daylight above. Every drop of oil stored here powered something bigger: lamps in the tunnels, gears that never stopped turning, and the engines that raised Quincy's copper empire skyward. And next, stop number 3, the Hoist House. Hoist House. Standing here, we've reached an important structure that will show us the evolution of this site later on in this video. This is the 1882 Hoist House, the second hoist house to serve the number 2 shaft. This building was the powerhouse that connected the men underground to the surface above. Inside, massive steam engines wound thick steel cables around enormous drums. These cables were attached to ore cars and man cages far below. With every turn, the hoist lifted tons of rock and copper from the depths of the Pewabic Lode to daylight. Over its history, the Quincy Mine operated 9 total shafts. Some were short-lived and eventually closed, but most of the production came from shafts number 2, number 4, and number 7. These became the lifelines of the operation, producing the copper that made Quincy one of the richest mines in copper country. These shafts connected to the hoist, allowing miners to reach even deeper into the Keweenaw bedrock, bringing copper ore to the surface where it could be weighed, sorted, and shipped. Today, if you take the Quincy Mine tour, you descend about 368 feet underground and travel nearly 2,000 feet into the mine. Even at that level, the air is cool and steady at 43 degrees year-round. We weren't able to take the underground tour today, but the Hoist house and remaining structures tell us plenty about how this mine operated and about the people who relied on these engines to carry them safely back to the surface. These engines didn't just lift copper. Every day they lifted men, lowering them into danger and hauling them back to their families at an end of a shift. We're sticking to the order of the app. So we may pass buildings and you go, why'd you just pass that? We'll be back, my friends. So you want to see all these buildings, stay tuned. But we're heading to stop number 4, the Miners Memorial House. From the Hoist house where men rose and fell with the cables, we arrive at the Miners Memorial House. This stop doesn't just remind us of loss. It reminds us of life of the men and families whose energy kept Quincy alive. Inside the memorial reminds us of something important. The miners weren't just names in a ledger or figures in a production report. They were living, breathing people like you and me. Their work provided the copper that built telegraph lines, powered cities, and armed the nation. But their lives were far more than their labor. They laughed, they worried, they raised families, and they left behind stories that still echo here. This place helps us remember that history isn't only about industry, it's about people. Since this was a remote location, the mining companies built housing to attract and keep workers. The neighboring Pewabic Mining Company constructed these simple saltbox style homes around 1870. One of them belonged to Joseph Martin, his wife, and their 9 children. Joseph's story reminds us of the risks that came with this work. In 1921, he lost his life in a mining accident. His family soon left the home behind, a powerful reminder that while mining created opportunity, it also carried ever-present danger. This house still stands as a testament to both the resilience of miners' families and the sacrifices they endured. It was here in Copper Country that the 1913 miners' strike took place, when workers demanded safer conditions and an 8-hour workday. The strike revealed just how much these men sacrificed, not only underground, but also in standing up for dignity and fairness. It became a turning point in labor history and remains part of their legacy remembered here. Well, we just got done touring stop number 4, the Miners' House. We're gonna walk across the courtyard to yet another hoisting house. I don't know more until I get there, but I don't know if it was the older one or the newer one, but we're heading to another hoisting house. And there's another look at the Miners Memorial House. And let's do a little panorama here. Oh, there's the beauty behind us. And that's where we're going next. Our next stop brings us face to face with one of the greatest engineering achievements in mining history, the 1918 Hoist House, home of the legendary Nordberg steam hoist, the largest ever built in the world. By the early 20th century, Quincy was digging deeper than ever before. The older hoist simply couldn't keep up. So in 1918, the company turned to the Nordberg Manufacturing Company of Milwaukee to design and build a machine on a scale the world had never seen. And here's a fun connection. This is yet another example of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, building an industrial giant. If you've seen my video on Big Muskie, the world's largest dragline excavator, you'll know it too was built in Milwaukee by the Bucyrus Erie Company. For those of you who haven't watched it yet, definitely check it out after this video. It's another incredible story of scale and industrial innovation, but right here in Quincy, the Nordberg hoist was Milwaukee's masterpiece for the copper industry, a machine designed to push mining technology to its absolute limits. The result was extraordinary: 240 feet flywheels, each weighing over 100 tons, driven by 2 massive steam pistons. The steam once spent was condensed and drained into retaining ponds out front, a reminder of just how much water and energy it took to keep this giant running. These pistons powered the enormous drum, winding and unwinding steel cables that ran deep into the mine. The massive steel cables left this building and connected to the iconic shaft number 2, located across from today's visitor center. At full speed, the hoist could pull copper ore in skips at up to 35 miles per hour from far below the surface. But at the beginning and end of each shift, those ore skips were replaced with man cars, capable of carrying up to 30 miners at a time. For safety, the man cars were operated much slower, only about 6 miles per hour. Of course, none of this power would have been possible without steam, and that steam was produced in the massive boiler houses, like the one we'll visit at stop number 7. It took endless coal, fire, and water to feed a machine of this scale. But to understand the Hoist story, we also need to step back to 1908. That year marked a turning point for Quincy. A brand new Rockhouse was built at shaft number 2, an impressive structure we'll explore later. This new Rockhouse first connected to the 1894 Hoist house we are heading to next, but by around 1920, its operations were tied directly into this building, powered by the Nordberg steam hoist. This is a perfect example of how every piece of Quincy's operation was interdependent. Rockhouses, hoist houses, boiler houses, and shafts. Together they formed a constantly evolving system, designed to push the mine deeper and farther. The 1918 hoist symbolized Quincy's determination to remain old reliable, but there's an irony here. While it was completed at enormous expense, the mine's greatest years of production were already behind it. In fact, the Nordberg had a surprisingly short working life. It was only used for about 11 years before operations stopped in 1929. The same year as Black Tuesday stock market crash. That year marked both the national economic collapse and the beginning of Quincy's final decline. Our next stop brings us to the Quincy 1894 Hoist House, a symbol of transition and innovation at the mine. Built in 1894, this was the third hoist constructed to serve shaft number 2, and for nearly 3 decades it was the centerpiece of Quincy's lifting operations. In its day, this structure represented a bold leap forward, stronger, faster, and more efficient than any that came before it. At the turn of the century, Quincy was constantly improving, expanding deeper, modernizing its surface works, and refining how ore was brought to daylight. The 1894 Hoist House became the foundation of that progress. Its success paved the way for the massive upgrades that would follow, culminating in the construction of the 1918 Nordberg steam hoist we discussed at the last stop. This building marks a bridge between two eras, the late 19th century, when steam power ruled the industrial world, and the early 20th century, when scale and precision defined the next generation of engineering. Without this step, the Nordberg hoist might never have been possible. Today, this hoist house serves as an interpretive space, helping visitors piece together the evolution of Quincy's machinery and the people who operated it. Through diagrams, photographs, and restored equipment, you can trace the story of how this mine adapted, innovated, and grew over nearly a century of change. The contrast between these two buildings tell a story all its own. One built of stone and endurance, the other of steel and ambition. Together they stand as monuments to progress, to the relentless pursuit of efficiency, and the ingenuity that made Quincy a model for mines across the country. Standing here, you can see how history layers itself. One generation's cutting-edge technology becoming the next generation's foundation. The 1894 Hoist House isn't just a relic. It's the stepping stone that carried Quincy Mine into the modern age. Of course, none of these hoists could move without power, and that power came from steam. Our next stop takes us to where heat and pressure came together to drive the heart of the Quincy Mine, the number 5 boiler house. Built around 1912, this boiler house once roared with heat and life. Inside stood 8 coal-fired boilers, each one feeding steam to the hoist engines, compressors, and pumps that drove the mine's operation. This was one of several boiler houses that kept the Quincy Mine alive. Each hoist and engine across the hill depended on steam, created in buildings like this one. Without them, nothing moved. not the hoist, not the rail cars, not even the pumps. Coal was hauled up the hill, often by the Quincy and Torch Lake Railroad, and shoveled into massive furnaces day and night. The boilers converted water into superheated steam, which was piped through heavy iron lines to nearby buildings, like the 1894 Hoist House, and most notably the Nordberg steam hoist. Every one of these boilers had its own firebox, stoker, and crew. Temperatures reached extreme levels, and the air was thick with soot and smoke. It was exhausting, dangerous work, but essential. With all that steam came smoke, and that meant towering smokestacks. The original stack once rose above this very spot, venting the black breath of industry high above Quincy Hill. For over a century, it was one of the site's defining landmarks. But between October 9, 2018 and June 25, 2019, that smokestack was finally removed for safety reasons, a sobering reminder that even the strongest remnants of industry can't last forever. Today, the number 5 boiler house stands without its chimney, but you can still imagine its presence. To truly picture this place look like, we rely on archival photos and a little imagination. Though much has vanished, every brick and bolt here was part of a vast web of energy that powered one of America's most productive copper mines. The number 5 boiler house shows us how everything at Quincy was interconnected, a giant machine built from smaller ones, all working in harmony. When you stand here surrounded by silence, you can almost hear the echo of steam hissing through pipes and the rumble of coal carts outside. And yet many pieces of that machine no longer exist. Some buildings have vanished entirely, leaving only stone outlines. Others survive only in old blueprints and photographs. To understand Quincy fully, we have to piece it together like a puzzle, part history, part archaeology, and part imagination. Our next 2 locations bring us to the lifeline that connected the Quincy Mine to the outside world, the Quincy and Torch Lake Railroad, and the facilities that kept it running, the water tower and the engine house. The Quincy and Torch Lake Railroad was established in 1888 to move copper-bearing rock from the mines down to the stamp mills along Torch Lake, and to haul coal, lumber, and supplies back up to power the hoist and boilers. It may have been only 6.5 miles long, but with extensions it stretched nearly 15 miles in total, making it the logistical backbone of the mine. It was small in scale, but immense in importance. The arteries that carried energy, materials, and manpower through Quincy's industrial body. This wooden tank once held thousands of gallons of water drawn directly from Portage Lake. Locomotives would pull alongside, lower their spout, and refill their boilers within minutes. The same water powered the steam that drove this entire complex, from hoist to pumps to the mine itself. The line ran on narrow gauge rails spaced just 3 feet apart, instead of the standard 4 feet 8.5 inches. That tighter spacing let trains navigate the steep grades and sharp curves of Quincy Hill, something larger railroads couldn't manage. Once the locomotives had their water, they came here to stop number 9, the engine house for maintenance, built in 1889. This building began with just 2 repair bays, but as the railroad expanded, it grew to 4, the layout still visible today. It was constructed from poor rock, waste stone pulled from the mine that contained too little copper to refine. Rather than discard it, Quincy reused it. For strong, inexpensive construction, you'll find the same rough, multicolored stone in hoist houses, retaining walls and boiler foundations across the site. Inside crew of machinists and mechanics worked tirelessly, cleaning boilers, repairing wheels, and tuning pistons. The clang of metal and the hiss of steam once echoed through these arches, keeping the narrow gauge line alive. Together, these 2 structures, the water tower and the engine house, represent both the lifeblood and the lungs of Quincy and Torch Lake Railroad. One supplied water for steam, the other ensured the locomotives that carried copper and coal could keep running safely. The railroad linked every part of Quincy, the mines, the mills, and the boilers, in one synchronized system. Fire, water, and steam all working in perfect balance. When the Quincy Mine finally closed in 1945, the Quincy and Torch Lake Railroad made its last run, marking the end of an era It was Michigan's last operating narrow gauge railroad, and though most of the rails are gone, the buildings that supported it still stand as a quiet witness to that legacy. Now that we've seen how steam and motion powered the surface, let's return to where it all began, the machinery that lifted copper from the depths below. Before we dive into our next location, a quick note. The Keweenaw National Historical Park app at the Quincy unit guides us through this 15-stop tour, focusing mainly on shafts 2, 4, and 7. But Quincy Mine operated 9 shafts over its lifetime, and the hillside is covered with the remains of other hoist houses, boiler sites, dry houses, community buildings, and more. Unfortunately, we only had time to complete this official 15-stop portion today, but stick around after stop 15, because in our final segment, let's call it stop 16, we'll highlight the many other structures you can still explore here. And one day, I'd love to come back and dive deeper into all the sites the app doesn't show you. As we continue our journey, you might notice we're getting further from the center of the Quincy Mine. That's intentional, because the next stop highlights just how massive this operation was. This is the number 4 Hoist House, which supported one of Quincy's most productive shafts during the late 1800s and early 1900s. It played a crucial role in keeping copper flowing, while other shafts were upgraded or expanded. While shaft number 2 became Quincy's technological showcase, shafts like number 4 kept production steady. That flexibility, being able to operate across multiple shafts at once, helped earn Quincy the nickname Old Reliable. The foundation you see here once supported powerful hoisting equipment driven by steam, supplied from boiler houses nearby, though smaller than the machinery we visited in stop 5 for shaft number 2. This equipment was non-stop, an everyday engine of progress. Think about this. Most of what we've explored so far revolves around just one shaft. Quincy had 9 over its lifetime. Many are long gone, and some we'll mention later, but shafts like number 4 show that this hill was once covered with activity, from steam pipes to rail lines to crews rushing between jobs. These ruins may stand quiet now, but for decades they were part of Quincy's daily heartbeat. Reliable, hardworking, essential. To understand how all of these hoists, big and small, kept moving, we need to see where the power came from. Our next stop takes us to the number 7 boiler house, built back in 1898. This one actually predates the number 5 boiler house we saw earlier, so we're stepping a little further back into Quincy's past as we explore this site. This boiler house powered shaft number 7, which operated further down the slope. Steam generated here ran the hoist, fed the air compressors, and powered the pumping systems that kept water from flooding the deeper levels. As Quincy expanded across the hillside, the company stopped treating each shaft like its own little island. Instead, they reorganized everything above ground. Boilers, hoist, air systems, and railroad spurs into consolidated surface works. The idea was simple: share the power. One boiler house could support multiple shafts. One line of steam could run several hoists. It's quiet here now, but inside these walls were banks of roaring upright boilers firing day and night. Temperatures soared well above 100 degrees. Coal dust hung in the air, the noise constant, and workers would put in exhausting hours covered in sweat and soot, always watching gauges and valves. Boiler workers rarely made the headlines in mining history. They weren't in the dramatic photos descending into the earth, but the truth is, mining could only continue because steam kept flowing. And this building played a role in one of the toughest chapters in copper country, the 1913 copper strike. While thousands of miners walked off the job, demanding safer conditions and shorter hours, crews here were still required to fire the boilers to prevent the deep levels from flooding. Many of those crews were members of the local Finnish community. If you look closely, you can still spot clues of what once stood here. The remnants of the old smokestack, the foundation where the boilers were anchored, the iron fittings where steam pipes ran down the shaft. These bricks are blackened from fire. The slag scattered around our feet is what's left after years of feeding coal into the flames. Standing here, you can really feel how Quincy wasn't just one shaft or one hoist. It was an entire interconnected system, a network working together to pull copper from the earth. Every pipe, every rail line, every boiler house like this was part of a bigger story of engineering, endurance, and constant adaptation. And now that we've seen where the power came from, let's head to where it was used. Just down the hill are the ruins of the number 4 Shafthouse, the gateway into the darkness below, where miners began their descent into a world powered by steam from this very spot. We've come now to the ruins of the number 4 Shafthouse, where miners began and ended their long days underground. Before mechanized lifts and man cars, men descended by whims, hoisting drums first powered by horses, later by steam, and by climbing ladders hundreds of feet down into the earth. Until the late 1880s, that was the daily reality. Slow, dangerous, exhausting. Number 4 wasn't the deepest of Quincy's shafts, but it was vital. Ore and men passed through here every day, keeping this side of the mine alive. Even though we only see concrete and twisted metal now, these ruins once held headframes, staging decks, and charging areas, the frontier between daylight and darkness. Each shift meant leaving home before dawn, descending into darkness, drilling and blasting through solid rock, and hoping to rise again to daylight. Most of the men here were immigrants, Finnish, Cornish, Irish, and German. This provides the perfect opportunity to discuss the people who made this operation possible, like we briefly did on stop number 4. Let's start with the men underground. The hierarchy below ground started with captains, assistant captains, and shift bosses at the top. These men managed operations, assigned duties, and kept the crews organized at every level. Here's something interesting. Not everyone who worked underground was actually considered a miner. That title was reserved for the skilled men who operated drilling machines, packed explosives, and set off charges. They were paid more for that expertise and trusted to shape the tunnels that followed the copper veins. Next were the block holers who drilled and blasted rock that became stuck. Dangerous precision work that kept operations moving. Then came the contract teams and drill boys. Contract miners were paid based on their output. More copper extracted meant more pay. A low day underground, though, could mean little money. The drill boys supported them, hauling tools, fetching water, and delivering the heavy equipment needed to keep the drills running. Below them were the cutters and chiselmen, because the native copper was too soft to break free with explosives alone. These men used hammer and chisels to free it from the surrounding rock. It was painstaking, muscle-driven work that demanded patience and skill. At the bottom of the underground hierarchy came the trammers, muckers, and trackmen. Once the rock was blasted, these men shoveled and loaded the ore into tram cars, pushing them through narrow tunnels to the hoist. It was brutal, back-breaking labor with low pay, but it kept the copper flowing. Finally, before the ore reached daylight, it passed through the hands of workers who sorted and loaded the material into skips for hoisting to the surface. These were the last men in the underground chain, the final link between the darkness below and the daylight above. With 9 different shafts, dozens of crosscuts, and more than 90 levels carved into the bedrock, Quincy was a vast interconnected underground labyrinth, a hidden city of tunnels. These ruins are what remains of the gatekeepers who let men into the world every day, and they remind us that every hoist house, every boiler, every pipe, and every brick we've seen today existed for one reason: to get these men down there and bring them back safely. Next, we'll shift our focus to the men above ground, the ones who kept the steam flowing, the hoist running, and the entire surface operation alive. As we leave the miners' world behind and step into surface operations, this stop brings us to the number 4 boiler house. This building helped power the entire hillside. The surface level crews who worked here were the lifeline that kept steam coursing through pipes to every hoist, pump, and shaft at Quincy. These weren't miners, but their work was every bit as critical. They were the ones who kept the fire burning, the pressure steady, and the engines alive. Inside these walls once stood 4 sets of massive coal-fired boilers, each roaring with heat. The coal came in by rail, shoveled in by hand, feeding a constant rhythm of smoke and steam. The heat drove pressure into pipes that powered the hoist, compressed air systems, and pumps that kept the lower mine levels from flooding. If you look at historic photos, you'll see the 2 18-foot chimneys rising proudly on either side of this building, visible for miles across the copper country skyline. By 1942, though, the story had changed. The boilers were removed, and the fires that once fueled this place were done. Although this specific site stopped operating in 1942, the larger Quincy Mine complex officially closed in 1945, but that's a little misleading. The truth is, the mine had already gone quiet back in 1929 when copper prices collapsed and after the stock market crashed. For more than a decade, this entire hill sat mostly silent until World War II rekindled the demand for copper for wartime use. Quincy briefly came back to life, but once the war ended, so did Quincy. Now that we've explored the underground hierarchy, let's talk about the people who work right here on the surface, the ones who kept the mine's power system running. At the top of that structure were the superintendents, surface captains, and surface bosses, the decision makers. They oversaw every aspect of day-to-day production, managing crews, scheduling maintenance, and keeping output on pace with the company's goals. Below them came the skilled tradesmen who kept the machinery alive. The hoist engineers and compressor engineers controlled the massive engines that lifted men and ore from the shafts and kept the mine dry. Alongside them were the boiler tenders and machinists, feeding coal, monitoring gauges, and repairing endless web of pipes and gears that stretched across Quincy Hill. The railroad teams like those we discussed in stops 8 and 9 operated the Quincy and Torch Lake Railroad, running trains that hauled copper ore, supplies, and men across the site's 15 miles of track. Without them, the ore would have never reached the stamp mill or smelter down the hill. Other vital surface workers included masons who repaired stonework, furnaces, and chimneys, carpenters who built and maintained the wood structures scattered across the property, watchmen who guarded the mine day and night, firemen who tended the roaring furnaces, and surface laborers who shoveled coal, hauled material, and kept everything moving. It's difficult to pinpoint exact wages for each of these trades, but these men formed a closely linked network whether you're running the hoist, firing the boilers, or maintaining the tracks. Each job mattered equally to keep the mine going. Together they were the living machinery that made this hill hum with energy. This sense of hierarchy and shared purpose wasn't unique to Quincy. We saw this dynamic at Fayette Historic State Park, another Upper Peninsula company town built around iron smelting. The managers, engineers, and furnace workers there lived by a similar rhythm. Different materials, same struggle, same spirit. If you haven't seen that episode yet, check it out after this one to see how both copper and iron shape the backbone of Michigan's industrial story. Today, the number 4 boiler house stands silent, but it reminds us of the men who worked above ground so others could work below. Together, they powered one of the greatest mining operations in the world. One shift, one fire, one day at a time. We've now arrived at one of Quincy's most innovative and worker-focused developments, the man engine shaft. This system marked a major turning point in how miners traveled underground, sitting right between the earliest and most modern methods of descent used here. Earlier, we talked about how men first relied on whims and endless ladders to reach the depths below. That was the old world, exhausting, dangerous, and time-consuming. The man engine became the crucial bridge between those early methods and the later technology that would change mining forever. The man engine was invented in Germany in the 19th century and used either water wheels or steam power to move a series of reciprocating rods and platforms. Miners would step onto a moving platform, ride it up or down 12 to 15 feet, step off onto a fixed platform, and then on to the next moving one. A steady rhythm of steps that carried them deeper or closer to the surface in stages. This technology spread through mining regions of Europe, including the Cornish copper and tin mines, where it became a staple of deep mining life. Many Cornish miners later immigrated to the Keweenaw, and it's very likely that their experience and familiarity helped bring the man engine concept to Quincy. Quincy installed its first man engine in 1862, and it changed everything. Miners no longer had to climb hundreds, or in some cases, thousands of feet of ladders at the beginning and end of their shift. The man engine conserved energy, reduced strain, and helped miners stay productive once they reached their work levels. Eventually, the next evolutionary leap arrived, the steam-powered hoist that carried men underground in man cars. These specialized cars replaced the need for stepping platform to platform. They were faster, safer, and capable of transporting 20 to 30 miners at a time directly to their working levels. By the early 1900s, these hoists began phasing out the man engine system and became the standard way miners entered and exited the shafts. We reached our final major stop on today's tour, the number 2 shaft Rockhouse. Even in ruins, this towering structure remains one of the most iconic and photographed symbols of the Quincy Mine and the entire copper country. If one place captures the scale, ambition, and industrial might of this operation, it's this one. Before we talk about the Rockhouse itself, it's important to understand what made Quincy different and ultimately successful. Quincy was the first copper mine in Michigan to switch from Fisher mining to amygdaloid mining, and that decision changed everything. Early miners in this region originally focused on fissure veins, narrow vertical cracks in the rock containing pockets or streaks of native copper. These veins were unpredictable, often ran out quickly, and caused many early mining ventures across the Keweenaw to fail. Quincy took a different approach. They shifted to mining amygdaloid beds, layers of ancient lava rock filled with gas bubbles that later became infused with copper deposits. Instead of chasing small cracks of copper, Quincy mined broad, consistent ore beds, which allowed for long-term and large-scale production. This shift marked the beginning of truly industrial-scale copper mining in Michigan. Now back to why this structure mattered so much. The current Rockhouse standing here was constructed in 1908, replacing earlier versions as Quincy modernized and expanded. Throughout the mine's history, shaft number 2 became the primary production shaft, the backbone of operations on Quincy Hill. It eventually extended an astonishing 9,260 feet along its incline, descending at roughly a 55-degree angle, and reaching a vertical depth of about 6,225 feet. To put that into perspective, miners working on the 92nd level would spend their full shift over a mile underground, in temperatures that often exceeded 90 degrees, with limited ventilation, high humidity, and heat radiating from the earth itself. This wasn't just a shaft, it was a gateway between two worlds. Miners traveled through the steep incline in man cars powered by steam hoist, a massive leap forward from the exhausting days of climbing ladders or using man engines. Copper rock was hauled to the surface in skips, powered by the Nordberg steam hoist we discussed earlier. Once the ore reached the Rockhouse, this building became the first stage in turning raw rock into a usable resource. As the ore arrived mixed with waste rock, workers here sorted through it and sized it for the next step of its journey. The copper-rich rock was separated from the poor rock, and nothing was wasted. The poor rock became a construction material, a resource Quincy put to good use. Many of the foundations, walls, and structures across the site were built using that poor rock, including several we've seen throughout today's walk. When the sorting and separation were complete, the processed copper rock was loaded into ore cars and sent down the hill along the Quincy and Torch Lake Railroad to the stamp mill, where the next phase of extraction took place. From this very structure, Quincy's copper began its journey into the world, and that copper helped build America. It became telegraph and telephone lines, warship components, brass and bronze for cannons, electrical generation equipment, industrial machinery, building and structural materials, and even U.S. pennies. If you pause here for a moment, you can feel how everything we've explored today connects back to this spot. This stop brings the story full circle. The geology, the labor, the technology, the community, and the copper that left Quincy Hill to power a nation. But our journey isn't finished quite yet. Before we conclude, we're going beyond the official National Park Service app 15-stop tour, because there's still more here to discover. Before we wrap up our time here at Quincy, there's something important we need to recognize. The official 15-stop self-guided tour on the Keweenaw National Historical Park app gives a fantastic overview, but it only shares part of the story. Quincy Mine was far larger, more complex, and much more spread out across this hillside than what we walked today. The National Park Service app is an amazing resource, but to truly understand Quincy, don't rely on the app alone. If you want the full picture, it's worth getting a map or extended guide, because so many remnants of Quincy's history sit just beyond the marked loop. We only had time today to walk the official route, but there are several nearby areas that help complete the story of Quincy Mine. Let's explore 4 nearby zones that reveal even more of the mine's industrial footprint beyond what we saw today. As we move into this first area, stretching between Cowsett-Latz Road and Lower Pewabic Road, we're stepping into land that once sat within the original Quincy Mine boundary line and was part of the mine's earliest claim. Many of the buildings here were essential to Quincy's early operations, the administrative and operational nerve centers that kept the mine running. Across the street from the corner of Highway 41 and Cowsett-Latz Road stands the Quincy Mine Office, built in 1897 to replace an earlier structure. This became the administrative hub of the entire operation, where business decisions were made, payroll was issued, and daily operations were managed. Across the road from the mine office stands the ruins of the No. 7 Shafthouse. Although it operated for only 4.5 years, from 1900 to 1905, this wasn't a sign of decline. This was during Quincy's golden era. Shaft No. 7 was closed as part of a restructuring strategy as Quincy consolidated resources into its most productive shafts, especially Shaft No. 2. Nearby is the site of the No. 7 Hoist House, which once held the machinery that raised and lowered miners, equipment, and copper ore. Little remains today, but it helps paint the picture of the constant movement that once defined this hillside. Continuing northeast, just before reaching the Shaft No. 2 Rockhouse, we come to 2 more important structures, the compressor building and the diamond drill house. You may remember passing them earlier near the No. 4 shaft area. They sit along the walking trail, but they are not official app stops, so many visitors miss them. The compressor building supplied air power for pneumatic drills underground, a huge advancement over the exhausting hand drilling era. The diamond drill house, also known as Timberman's Shanty, had a more somber role in Quincy's history. It earned the nickname the Dead Man's House, as this is where accident victims were brought before being taken to their families. This spot reminds us of the human cost behind this industry. We also find the remnants of the Shaft No. 1, one of Quincy's original openings into the earth. This shaft was in full operation by 1854 and continued until 1892. Before the Pewabic Lode was discovered in 1874, Quincy struggled to stay profitable, and Shaft No. 1 reflects those early uncertain years. After the Pewabic Lode transformed Quincy's fortunes, Shaft No. 1 was used mainly as an internal mine shaft, helping to connect underground workings rather than drive new copper extraction. It may not be part of the old reliable years, but this shaft represents the beginning, the foundation of everything that followed. As we move between Lower Pewabic Road and Sunshine Road, we step outside the original Quincy boundary line, an area shaped by Quincy's first major expansion, the purchase of the Pewabic Mining Company in 1891. This zone became Quincy's workshop and mechanical district. Here stood the blacksmith shop, where drills, chisels, and countless custom parts were forged. Nearby, the machine shop contained lathes and milling equipment needed to fabricate and repair machinery that kept the mine running. Nearby are the ruins of the No. 6 Shafthouse, which operated from 1891 to 1931. And the story doesn't end there. Shaft No. 6 reopened from 1937 to 1945 as global tension rose and demand for copper increased. This revival began before the U.S. entered World War II, signaling that industry leaders saw what was coming. Mining here resurged not because Quincy was booming, but because the world was preparing for conflict, and copper would once again become critical. Close by stood the No. 6 compressor building and the No. 6 and No. 2 boiler houses, all part of the steam and air system that kept drilling, hoisting, pumping, and heating systems alive before the era of large centralized boiler plants. This district once echoed with the clanging of iron, the hiss of steam, and the steady rhythm of skilled workers keeping the mine functioning. As we continue past Sunshine Road towards Pavoli Road, the land becomes more spread out. Here we enter Quincy's eastward expansion zone, shaped by the acquisition of the Mesnard and Pontiac Mine in 1897 and the Franklin Mine in 1908. These purchases allowed Quincy to extend its workings into new territory as miners followed the copper further along the ridge. One of the key sites here is Shaft No. 8. It operated from 1897 to 1931, contributing during Quincy's most productive decades. Like Shaft No. 6, it also saw a brief revival from 1937 to 1945 as wartime demand for copper surged. But Shaft No. 8's story takes one final surprising turn. In 1976 and 1977, it was dewatered and explored by the Homestake Mining Company to evaluate the possibility of reopening Quincy. For a moment, it looked like the mine might return to life. The results weren't strong enough to restart operations, but this attempt shows how valuable Quincy's geology still was, even decades after its closure. Further along is Shaft No. 9, with a very different story. Work began around 1908 as Quincy sought to develop newly acquired Pontiac ground. The goal was to open a new shaft and tap additional copper deposits, but as the sinking of the shaft began and the surface works took shape, the Copper County Strike of 1913 erupted, bringing progress to a halt. Shaft No. 9 was never completed or put into full operation. Today, only a small rock pile marks the attempt, a quiet reminder of a promising expansion interrupted. Had things gone differently, this eastern side of Quincy Hill might have looked very different than it does today. To fully understand Quincy, we also need to look beyond the hill itself to where the copper went next. The Quincy Stamp Mill, located downhill along Portage Lake, is where ore was crushed and separated. The size of its ruins show how much rock passed through Quincy's hands. Across the canal in Hancock sits the Quincy Smelter, where concentrated ore was refined into nearly pure copper. Today it remains one of the last surviving historic copper smelters in the United States. These off-site locations complete the copper's journey, from the rockhouses we explored above, down to the lake, and across the canal to become copper that helped build a nation. When we started this journey today, I mentioned that we unfortunately missed the underground tour, and honestly, at first, I thought that meant we'd be missing the heart of the Quincy Mine experience. But walking this hillside step by step, building by building, changed that. By staying above ground, we slowed down. We noticed details. We listened to the stories written into the landscape itself. We imagined the lives lived here, the early mornings, the long shifts, the families waiting at home, and the generations that built a community around this mine. Missing the tour ended up giving us something different, maybe something deeper. It reminded us that history isn't only found underground, it's found in the footprints, the foundations, and the memories left behind. The miners of Quincy didn't just extract copper, they built lives, traditions, and a legacy that still echoes across the Keweenaw. Walking this ground at our own pace helped us feel this connection, not just learn about it. And if you've walked with us through this story today, thank you. Sharing this experience with you makes it even more meaningful. Next time, we're continuing this journey through copper country as we explore the Calumet and Hecla Industrial District, another chapter in the story of the industry that shaped this region and the lives of the people who called it home. History isn't just found underground. Sometimes it's best discovered one step at a time.
As a junior ranger,
It was really cool just to see them.
I, Brooke, say I, Brooke, promise to explore Keweenaw's wonders. Promise to explore Keweenaw's wonders from the Porkies to the harbor. From the Porkies to the harbor. Imagining the people in its past. Say imagining. The people in its past. The heritage and culture. And to use what I learned. And to use what I learned. To preserve, protect, and share. Say to preserve, protect, and share. To preserve, protect, and share. Okay, alright, I think we did good. This is his first time doing it. This is your first time? This is his first one. Every time you do it, you get a junior ranger badge. Ours is right here, the junior ranger one. So we give that to you and we say, ask mom and dad for help to put that on your shirt so you don't poke yourself. And then specifically for our junior explorer book, we got you a little sticker here that you can put in your book or you can wear on your shirt.
Well, that's about gonna do it here, ladies and gentlemen, from the Quincy Mine. It was an amazing stop, 15 total stops, and we got to enjoy and walk through history of ore mining here in the Upper Peninsula. I want to thank you all for watching. Until the next one.